Earlier this year, the company who owns Winamp announced that they were going to be open sourcing the legendary MP3 player for Windows. We have Winamp, and now it's going to be open source. This is a very exciting thing. Everyone was very positive about this because, well, it's Winamp. And open sourcing it is just a great thing for the preservation of software, right? If we need the source code for famous software like this. Now, there was a lot we didn't know. This was back in May. There was a lot we didn't know. We didn't even know what the open source license was going to be. We had no idea whatsoever. Well, one thing we did know was that it was going to be released on September 24th. That's it. That's the only tidbit we knew, was Winamp open source September 24th. Everyone was very excited. Well, yesterday was September 24th, and they followed through. They released Winamp as open source. And it went a little funky. It went real funky. The response from people was, for the most part, not exactly positive. There was a lot of amused poking and making fun of how Winamp did this, and let's dive into that right now. So first of all, if you go to winamp.com, they have a whole page dedicated to where you can join the project, where you can help develop. Do you want to be a part of the community of developers who improve and maintain the historic Winamp player? And then you can join their GitHub page. Great. So if you go to github.com/Winamp desktop, you can find the source code. This is great. This was all published yesterday. Absolutely fantastic. We've got the source code to Winamp. So let's look at the source code license, because here is where things go off the rails more than a little bit. The source license for Winamp is a brand new license. It is not a pre-existing license. It's not the GPL, it's not MIT, it's not BSD, it's not really any of these things. It is the Winamp Collaborative License, the WCL. They've already had to modify it once. I'm going to read a little bit to you, and you tell me what jumps out at you. Quote, "This license governs the use, modification, and distribution of the Winamp software. By using, modifying, or distributing this software, you agree to the following terms." Okay, it's good so far. It's a license just for Winamp. Nothing but Winamp. Here we go. The preamble, quote, the Winamp Collaborative License is a free, copyleft license for software and other kinds of works. What else is it for? If you have a license that's named the Winamp license, and you say at the very top that it is just for the Winamp software, what other kinds of works could it be for besides the Winamp software? I wonder if they actually proofread a lot of this. It continues. It is designed to ensure that you have the freedom to use, modify, and study the software, but with certain restrictions on the distribution and modifications to maintain the integrity and collaboration of the project. Okay, I also want to point out that they call it out as both free and copyleft. That is an interesting thing. We'll be coming back to that a little bit. Let's jump down a bit here. Let's jump down to the restrictions section. Because in a lot of ways, when you're talking about software licenses, that's kind of the important part. Like, what can't you do with this source code? Well, they currently have 2 bullet lists here, 2, under the restrictions. They had a third one until earlier today. I'm going to read the first to you now, then we'll talk about the third. The first one. No distribution of modified versions. You may not distribute modified versions of the software, whether in source or binary form. Okay, so you can make changes, but you have to give those changes back to Winamp, and it's just for the official distribution, which follows to the second restriction, official distribution. Only the maintainer of the official repository Only the maintainers of the official repository are allowed to distribute the software and its modifications. All right, so you're not going to be taking Winamp and making your own, I'm not going to go out and make Lunduke amp, right? Like I can't make it based on Winamp, right? That's what it's all about. If I'm making code changes, it's to Winamp proper, and that's it, and that's all. I can see all the code all I want, but I can't use the code in part or in full for anything else. Okay, that's what they're going with. Honestly, there's still a real benefit to having the source code out there for Winamp. It's great from a historical perspective and a learning perspective. Just the software preservation aspect of it alone makes it valuable. I surely would love to have seen it under a different license that made it possible for us to do other things with it and make different versions, but at least it's a little bit of something. But when this first released, there were some changes here. Now you'll note this is version 1.0.1 of the Winamp collaborative license. The 1.0 version had an additional restriction here. I'm going to go ahead and read this to you now. No forking. You may not create, maintain, or distribute a forked version of the software. Huh. I mean, that was kind of implied with the no distribution of modified versions, right? Because if you can't distribute a modified version, either in binary or in source code, then you really can't do a fork, right? You can't fork it. But they specifically called out no forking. Well, let's see how the community took to that, shall we? Let's go to the Winamp GitHub page. As of right now, the time of recording this video, there are 786 forks, official fork projects on GitHub, because they're hosting this on a public GitHub repository, right? So there's a fork button. So people are clicking the fork button and they're making all sorts of forks. Winamp, how about I fork anyway? It's an official fork of Winamp. Literally, there's a fork called "How About I Fork Anyway?" Illegal Winamp fork. Winchamp, womp womp. There's just tons and tons and tons of forks. There's hundreds and hundreds of forks. When I went to bed last night, it was around 300 something. When I woke up this morning, we're getting close to 800. I would not be surprised if by the time I publish this video, there's over 1,000 forks of Winamp. Now, they went ahead and after there was a bit of backlash around this, they removed that no forking restriction, so you can fork it now. The problem is that also it runs afoul of the no distribution of modified versions requirement, unless all of those forks don't change a single line of code. Unless they change no code whatsoever, they are going to be running afoul of this particular license anyway. Now, interesting GitHub has a term of service. If you go to docs.github.com, you can find a GitHub terms of service, and there is item 5 of the GitHub terms of service deals with license grant to other users. I'm going to read the first paragraph to you because it's kind of relevant here. Any user-generated content you post publicly, including issues, comments, and contributions to other users' repositories, may be viewed by others. Okay. By setting your repository to be viewed publicly, you agree to allow others to view and fork your repositories. This means that others may make their own copies of content from your repositories in repositories they control. If you set your pages and repositories to be viewed publicly, you grant each user of GitHub a non-exclusive worldwide license to use, display, and perform your content through GitHub service, and to produce your content solely on GitHub as permitted through GitHub's functionality. All right, so basically what that's saying is, if you put a repository containing software and anything else on GitHub and you flag it as public, you agree that other people can fork it inside of GitHub. Now that term of service only applies to GitHub specifically, right? So this Winamp collaborative license, when it originally said you can't fork it, that was running afoul of GitHub's terms of service, which obviously was a no-no if you're going to host on GitHub. So they deleted that forking line. However, all people are allowed to do based on this license is click the fork button, name the fork, and that's it. If they change one character, which many of them have already, outside of that, they are going to be running afoul of the Winamp Collaborative License version 1.0.1, which, based on the fact that there's already close to 1,000 forks, you got to know a bunch of them are editing things just to be snarky about it, and that number's only going to go up. Obviously, this was going to happen, right? I mean, we're talking about open source nerds here. They're going to get snarky about it. They're going to see what they can get away with. They're just gonna. Whether they should or not, I'll leave that up as an exercise to the viewers, the listeners out there. But just the same, it's gonna happen. Now, interestingly, they announced this. Winamp announced this all over the place. They announced this over on their X account, which, it isn't huge. It's got like 20,000 followers or so. But it went poorly. People were pointing out nonstop how the license was incredibly limiting. You couldn't fork it. That was a problem. You can't modify any of the code and release it to people other than to send it to the Winamp developers themselves. They didn't like that. Please use a different license, on and on and on and on. Winamp has gone in and deleted every post that they have made since November of 2021 onwards, with the one exception of their pinned post that they made back in May that the Winamp source code will be available. And that one is just flooded with people talking about, hey, you did this wrong. You needed to use a different license, blah, 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 blah. But Winamp went through, and when they announced it, they announced the source code early yesterday morning. They deleted that post. They deleted all sorts of stuff. Basically, they're going in and trying to cover stuff up as best they can and cover their tracks here. Here's where I stand on this. First, they can make it whatever license they want. It's their software. It's their right to release it however they want to. The fact that they release the source code at all is nice. It's nice from a historical software preservation point of view. I wish more companies would do that sort of thing, even if they're not comfortable releasing it under like a BSD, MIT, Apache, GPL, whatever license. At least it's under a license that allows us to look at the code and make new builds of the code and whatnot. I think having it under such a restrictive license is difficult because as it currently stands, if Winamp just doesn't do anything with the software, there's not much that we as developers or we as nerds can legally do to continue to keep the software operational under newer systems. As new systems come out, backwards compatibility breaks, and if we want to get it running again, it's going to require some modifications, even if small ones. And currently, the license prohibits that. So I think it was a mistake to put it under such a restrictive license, but again, it's their code. They get to decide what to do with it. That said, they stated that it is a free copyleft license. Now, let's parse that out a little bit here. They say free as in lowercase f, which means free as in cost, which means we are free to use the license. If I want to use this license, I don't have to pay them a royalty to use the license. That's really what that word there means. If they use a capital F, it means something entirely differently, blah, 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 blah. But the part I want to focus on here is the copyleft. Winamp Collaborative License is a free copyleft license. Well, what is a copyleft license? Now, a copyleft is a legal license that allows for the free, as in no cost, distribution of copyrighted works while maintaining, free actually means both no cost as in and unencumbered, but of copyrighted works while maintaining the same rights in any derivative works. Okay, so really break that down for a second here. So can we do that with the Winamp Collaborative License, right? If it's a copyleft license, that means that we can freely, unencumbered, as long as we adhere to the license, distribute the work as long as we maintain the same rights in the derivative works. Well, this particular license prohibits derivative works. So therefore, it is not a copyleft license because you can't do derivative works. Now, of course, you could build this code, but you cannot distribute even unmodified binaries, right? So you can't, according to the restrictions, only the maintainers of the official repository are allowed to distribute the software and its modifications. Okay, so you cannot distribute the software. You cannot distribute the code. You cannot distribute the binaries, which means if you have forked it, just like all these forks did, both you and GitHub are violating to the letter the terms of this legal document that they've put forth here, the Winamp Collaborative License, which in theory we are all agreeing to by working with the software. Therefore, you cannot distribute it. Therefore, this is not a copyleft license. Now, if people could distribute versions of Winamp, like if you could take it, build it, and distribute it, or just say package up the source code without changing it and send it to someone else, then you could make the argument that it is a copyleft license, albeit an extraordinarily restrictive one. But the fact that it's limited, where you cannot give people the code or the binaries, even unmodified, means it is not a copyleft license. So it looks like whoever put this license together didn't fully understand how source code licenses work, how open source works from a legal perspective. And so I would suggest to whoever is running Winamp, get a hold of someone who actually understands how these software licenses work, because there's many different contradictory statements within the license that ultimately is going to make it difficult for you to enforce the license. So if it says it's a copyleft license, that has a specific legal meaning that you can distribute derivative works as long as you maintain the same license, the same rights from the same license, or a compatible license with the same rights. In this case, you cannot distribute, therefore it is not a copyleft, but it says it's a copyleft, so that means you can distribute. You've got to figure that out. So this is, it's kind of funny. My guess is we're already at version 1.0.1 of this license. We'll see 1.0.2 and 0.3 very, very soon. Just the same, kudos to the Winamp team for releasing the source code, albeit weirdly. They're going to get yelled at a lot because they really screwed up on how they did it. But just the same, if they hadn't screwed up at all, if they had released it under a BSD license, someone would have yelled at them. They'd have gotten yelled at for not releasing it under a GPL license, right? No matter how they release it, there's gonna be some segment of open sorcery that is gonna get pissed off and snarky and irate about it and go on rants about it. That's how computer nerds work. That's how the open source world is. What can you do? But man, they really stepped into it in how they handled this. Hopefully they get this fixed up. Hopefully they rectify some of the problems with the license so that people can actually work on it. Specifically, I would recommend to them that they modify the license such that it is possible to distribute derivative works for the specific reason of historical preservation of the software. It looks like, if you go to winamp.com, it looks like the company is really focusing its earnings future, its future profitability on, Android and iOS versions of Winamp, and on selling songs and all different sort of things. So this classic Winamp software is really being put out there right now for goodwill and good press and good PR, right? It's trying to drum up enthusiasm for this great thing from our digital music past, right? People have nostalgia for Winamp, and it's trying to build upon that. And I would suggest to them, if they're really trying to capitalize on that, find a license that you like. It can be fairly restrictive, but one that allows the publication of derivative works in some forms, at least in some capacities. That way, you're going to allow people to get Winamp running on more machines. You're going to ensure that Winamp will run well into the future, and you're going to make a lot of nerds a lot happier. just a suggestion, because I know they're going to end up listening to this show. I would suggest they go down that route. But in the meantime, I'm going to amusedly be scrolling through the great names of the different the different Winamp forks. I like Womp Womp. Personally, Womp Womp is great, along with Winamp, How About I Fork Anyway. Those are two of my favorites so far. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, by the way, go to lunduke.com and lunduke.locals.com, blah, 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 blah. That's where you find all the shows and the articles and me hanging out. It's great. You love it very much. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the whole inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.